Well, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, or good noon, as would be here in Dallas. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today, which is the CBRS Alliance addresses healthcare connectivity challenges. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Josh. So a little bit of housekeeping in our welcome here. By joining the webinar, of course, you agree to the terms of the privacy policy and webinar disclosure that was in the event description. The session is being recorded. Be aware of that for use and distribution. We will put it up on the website after this. The slides will be posted. The video will be posted, as well as the questions. If we don't get to any questions today, we'll make sure to include those on the website as well. Speaking of questions, we will address questions at the end of the webinar, make sure we have enough time to cover everything. But please note that you do have a question window in the webinar control panel. Feel free to submit questions at any time during the webinar. What I will do as your host is I will feed those to our speakers, and I may ask for some additional clarification on some questions, but my job is to hand those over to our speakers or the learning colleagues that are here today to address. So continue on. Quick introduction of myself. So I'm Alan Ewing, the Executive Director of CBRS Alliance. My background is I come from Nokia and then other industry associations prior to this. Joined the CBRS Alliance about 2 years ago. Well, almost exactly 2 years ago now. And since then, we've really grown remarkably. Today, just so you know, we have our 161st member company joining us. So this is a remarkable growth of interest. Even in the tough days that we have right now, the interest is quite high. This is an incredibly useful tool, as we all know, and healthcare being one of the areas where we will touch. The other speakers we have with us today, I'll introduce them. Next slide, is Tighe Kinney. He is the Senior Vice President of Business Development at Druid Software. Tighe joined Druid in mid-2013, bringing 20 years experience in international sales and marketing and various commercial roles, helped many startups with their go-to-market strategies in B2B and B2C environments, instrumental in developing market for Druid's private networks in the US and in Europe, Middle East, Africa. He works closely with Druid small cell partners, third-party application providers to help their channels deliver the latest mission-critical use cases over their private networks. Tighe's latest products include some of the industry's first private LTE solutions for energy providers, healthcare, and Industry 4.0 applications. After being shortlisted in 2017, he was a member of the team that won the Small Cell Forum Award in 2019 for software and services for management, automation, and orchestration for Druid's 4G Ramus product software application. Our other speaker today is Troy Reese, Director of Business Development at Tango Networks, also a fellow Dallasite, I have to mention that. Troy is the Director of Business Development at Tango Networks, leads efforts with devices and SIM subgroup in the CBRS Alliance. Tango Networks is a global mobile operator with a wide range of unique capabilities aimed at security and control-focused organizations looking to deploy mobile-first services. During his almost 30-year career, primarily in healthcare, IT, Troy has sat on all sides of the boardroom table, delivering hardware, clinical software, managed services, as well as managing field services personnel in over 50 hospitals. So we're very fortunate to have both of these gentlemen with us. Their vast experience and background and the practicalities of deployments will be, I think, very interesting to you. Next slide, Josh. So a quick overview of the agenda. Obviously, we're here in the introduction. I will tell you a little bit about OnGo and the CBRS Alliance, and then we will transition over to Troy and Tighe, and then really have an opportunity to talk, let you guys ask some questions and field those questions. Next slide, please. So what is OnGo and CBRS? Just a real brief history of where we've come from. The lineage really goes back to 2010 when the initial discussions began in NTIA and FCC through 2012 on how we could do spectrum sharing potentially in the 3.5 gigahertz. That really came to a place of interest in April of 2014 when the FCC finalized the proposal for spectrum sharing in the band. CBRS Alliance was formed mid-2016, and primarily its mission, of course, is LTE and eventually 5GNR in the CBRS band and the 3.5 gigahertz band that we also know as band 48. So 2018, we launched the OnGo brand and our certification program. We did our initial set of baseline specifications, primarily for network services and coexistence. And then in 2019, very exciting year, because that is when the SASs began or really finalized their process towards certification by the FCC. Our initial commercial deployment launch occurred in September of 2019, and then the final review of reports at the end, with 2020 being what we had labeled the year of OnGo, not recognizing, of course, the impending outbreak of the pandemic as we did. But in many respects, this is really underlying the importance of what OnGo and CBRS is all about. Full commercial deployment began in the beginning of the year, and our Release 3 specs just a couple of weeks ago. The PAL auction is on the horizon for mid-July, and so many of the pieces of the puzzle are still all well in place, and the needs that we are addressing are being taken care of by our member companies. Next slide, Josh. So very high level, the spectrum sharing rubric that we operate under is codified under the FCC Part 96 rules. Part 96 is the simple colloquial way of saying it. If you're interested in the details, you can look in the Code of Federal Regulation, CFRs, and you see the section there to drill into. Wireless Innovation Forum is a partner organization to CBRS Alliance. WIN Forum, as it is known, work cooperatively with us to really develop testing, certification, approvals, etc. in the CBRS band. And here you see just a very high-level description of the two orgs. Wireless Innovation Forum is really about making sure the SAS, the functionality, the architecture, etc., is defined, is tested, and provides that common framework for the certification of the SASs and also for the end devices. FCC, of course, is the regulatory body on top of all of that, but Wireless Innovation Forum is a key element in that taking the rules of Part 96, turning them into practical testable approaches. CBRS Alliance is very much dedicated to LTE and 5GNR in the band. That is where we take over. So we utilize the work and build on the work that Wireless Innovation Forum does to bring LTE to the band. Next slide, Josh. And, you know, again, just many of you know this, this is a classic look at how the spectrum is defined, where it is. So from 3.55 to 3.70, we have this chunk of 150 megahertz of spectrum, what has often been referred to as a embarrassment of riches, really, of spectrum. And you see the three tiers in the spectrum sharing definition. The top level, the incumbents, these are the ones we all know. These are our military, DoD, and fixed satellite service operators. Also the WISPs that are currently operating under Part 90. And then you see where we come in Tier 2 and 3. The PALs are the auction prioritization. So this is the auction that will take place in July. This is a county by county based auction in the US. And there are 7 channels per county available. And then finally, Tier 3 is what's known as general authorized access, no license needed. Just, of course, if a CBSD, a base station that supports LTE and the CBRS band, or any radio technology really, that base station needs to be in communication with a SAS and under the control of a SAS. Next slide. And then, you know, some high-level words that we thought were very interesting. This is from our friends at the NTIA and Chairman Tighe. at the FCC. But really what it underlines is that this has been a cooperative effort between government and private industry, and that the work that has been done has been in close collaboration inside the government, the FCC, Department of Defense, NTIA, but interfaced into private industry to figure out how to share this spectrum. We knew this, I think everyone recognized the spectrum was underutilized, and thinking forward to try to find ways to share that spectrum effectively without impacting the incumbents, the Department of Defense primarily, has been a real win. And what you see here from both NTIA and Chairman Tighe has been underscoring that cooperation and the value of that cooperation and how successful it's really been. Chairman Tighe has been one of the real champions of this, as well as others, other FCC commissioners, and we were very appreciative of their work and their support in this. Next slide, Josh. And then just very briefly, you hear us talk about CBRS, you hear us talk about OnGo. OnGo is really the brand name. So this is the brand name similar to other brand names in technology. It's really about LTE and eventually 5GNR in the CBRS band. So OnGo is a simple way of talking about those LTE 5GNR deployments in the CBRS band. We also talk about it when it comes to certification. So we talk about the OnGo certification program. CBRS Alliance, of course, is us as an organization. The term CBRS comes from the FCC rules and defines the band. So when you're talking about the band in generic terms, it's great and appropriate to use CBRS. But when you're talking about LTE and specifically the work we do here at the Alliance, OnGo is really the appropriate language to use. Next slide. Very good. And so now, I've set up, done my quick bit here, tried to keep it as quick as I could so that you could get to the real meat and the real interesting part. I'd like to introduce Troy Reese, as I mentioned, Director of Business Development at Tango Networks. Troy, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who was on the WebEx here, took the time. So there are a ton of use cases out there for private LTE or OnGo around IoT type devices that use data. And there are some hospitals that are already starting to build out those networks for those deployments. However, since my company focuses on voice, that is primarily what we'll be discussing today as it relates to voice over private LTE. So in my career, I would guess that I've toured at least 300 hospitals and I've worked in a handful of them. And one thing that can't be denied is that mobile voice services are just terrible inside buildings, even if they are located in a major city. The reception is even worse in rural areas. Whether it is the absence of cellular towers, the maze of corridors, the low E glass, or the explosion of competing devices for spectrum, hospitals were simply not built for acceptable spectrum transmission. If you couple that with a variety of use cases that are competing for that spectrum, the result is simply not going to be positive. The reality is that hospitals are just not built for wireless communications. Each use case has a trade-off of immediacy, bandwidth, and criticality, and Wi-Fi is not designed for this. Unfortunately, there are just too many internal and external forces working against each other. These communications use cases are causing conflict for consistent, reliable wireless communications. First, you have patients and their guests who are demanding better connectivity and faster speeds to allow them to have access to their lifelines. Those lifelines may be streaming movies from Netflix or live video chats with their loved ones. Either way, they're huge data hogs on the network. You have life-critical machine communications that are at the forefront of patient services, different devices like MMR machines that are competing with spectrum and causing interference. Of course, you have general back office communications that allow for secure access to files and images, etc., that allow the staff to get access to what they need whenever and wherever they may be. There's the need for emergency calling where connecting the right people at the right time is paramount. Even telehealth will start to conflict with this as the need for remote patient support continues to increase. But there is good news for some regions in that the FCC has set aside funds for COVID-19 telehealth solutions, and potentially some of those dollars could be used for implementing infrastructure for private LTE. Next slide, please. So the IT landscape for healthcare is just not conducive for proper control of mobile devices. the IT organization undoubtedly supports way too many of those devices. And as a doctor or nurse or staff, how many devices are too many to deliver the best patient care? They definitely don't want to have a tool belt to carry all the devices that they ultimately need to carry around the hospital and deliver the appropriate care. And nurses' stations are typically electrical hazards with the multitude of devices that are plugged in and charging. Most of those devices are critical, yet many are nothing more than the latest and greatest that a doctor feels that he or she needs rather than wants, or rather wants to deliver patient care. And we all know that catering to the demands of the doctors is pretty important. Unfortunately, those devices are using Wi-Fi that is competing for bandwidth. The only thing consistent with the performance of communications devices in a hospital is, well, the lack of consistency. Between competing devices conflicting with spectrum, or the lack of quality of coverage, it just isn't feasible to rely on a mobile device as part of a clinical toolkit. While it may work in some places, it just doesn't work everywhere. Even if your hospital is big enough to have a DAS installed, there could still be issues throughout the building for consistent connectivity. And whatever the device of the day is that they're using, it almost certainly does not work outside the building. So if you can't rely on it 100% of the time, then how can it be an effective tool? Clinical workers literally walk miles a day around the hospital, and mobility is absolutely critical. Private LTE offers a better handover between fewer access points as the user roams the campus. And what about the recent needs that COVID has presented for hospitals to rapidly build triage centers or even ICU units in a space that wasn't currently wired for connectivity? Private LTE offers a faster way to deploy those solutions and will better accommodate the staff and clinicians who are all over the building. We haven't even discussed security yet for the users that are roaming these buildings. It's important to note that security isn't just data. It's a guarantee of a secure communications channel, and it's also a separation of service. Wi-Fi sits in the IMS band, and it was designed for device connectivity. It was not designed for voice. Wi-Fi is a single IP infrastructure, which is easy to implement, but you must be careful, or you must have careful management of firewalls to avoid hacking into the system. My son serves in the Air Force in the intelligence squadron, and if it isn't wired, they don't use it. In fact, he can't even take a mobile device into a building where he works. However, it is important to note that there are groups within the DoD that are considering private LTE for the reasons being discussed. But ultimately, if you're deploying handsets to doctors and nurses that are mobile, which undoubtedly you are, you need to make sure those devices are secure. You may be asking yourself, well, what about mobile device managers? Sure, MDMs are a great way to secure some aspects of the device, but they're expensive, they're cumbersome, and they don't provide everything that your IT group would ultimately wish to control. With private LTE, you get a dedicated spectrum that offers end-to-end authentication and encryption capabilities that are based on a controllable SIM. Next slide, please. So in this current and post-COVID world, all businesses, regardless of industry, are struggling with keeping their employees connected. What good is that $400 desk phone sitting at the office when the employees have been forced to work from home? Private LTE in combination with tools like ours enables the mobile-only revolution. Your doctors and staff are already carrying a mobile device. Do you really need to hand them something else when they're on the campus? Why not consolidate and give them something that they want? With the adoption of dual SIM phones and the integration of the band 48 on devices from Samsung, Google, or a few others, and especially the iPhone 11 and their newest iPhone SE that's priced at $399, your staff can have a truly secure business connected device that can tie into the PBX for call management, routing, forwarding, short code dialing, or even third-party apps to support nurse call systems, etc. So I think it's important to note here before I close that there is absolutely a need and a place for Wi-Fi in your environment. Why not use it for public consumption or for non-essential business use, and then leverage private LTE for your corporate and essential needs? When security is paramount and you need to count on connecting with your staff, Voice over Private LTE offers the best security, offers the best quality of service anywhere on the campus. And with a properly configured SIM with a mobile subscription, those devices can be used on public networks as well when traveling outside the building. With private LTE and integrated with services like ours, you truly can have the anywhere wireless network. Well, that's it for me. I appreciate your time, and I'm going to hand it over to Tighe with Druid Software.
Thank you, Troy. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Greetings from Ireland and greetings from the Druid team. So let's talk about how OnGo can help. I think Troy highlighted some great connectivity issues there. So we're going to look at a couple of use cases. The first one is hospitals. These are normally large buildings, multi-site environments. From our experience in other countries where OnGo type spectrum has been available for over 10 years now, there can be anything from 5,000 to 10,000 mobile workers in these environments. So being able to easily deploy and rapidly roll out dedicated data, OnGo data in these environments is really important. And that the doctors, nursing staff, maintenance staff can access the highest data performance that's complementary to the Wi-Fi network and resilient and redundant to that Wi-Fi network in those environments is really important. We move on next to elderly care. Slightly different environments, tend to be smaller than hospitals. You'll have a mixture here of often assisted living with maybe a high dependency dementia care unit in the center of the campus and environment. And here, the demographic is older people. And you're seeing, a lot of smart optical IoT type sensors being seamlessly integrated to private 4G networks in these environments. And these help to provide vital insight into how the residents are doing 24/7. These sensors are tailor-made, so the resident can adjust them depending on their dependency. They can put do not disturb on them, for example, but if they're highly dependent, we give an example here of a resident leaving the bed, they're restless in the night, they need to go to the toilet, etc. And the sensor can automatically send a signal to the carrier's smartphone just to keep an eye and make sure everything's okay in those environments. And then finally here we look at remote healthcare. Really, really important in these times of sheltering in place, etc. We estimate that there's up to 24 million Americans who don't have high-speed internet access. OnGo can help an awful lot here by rapidly and cost-effectively rolling out data into these remote locations and connecting both citizens that can access this telehealth care and save them having to go to hospitals. But also we heard of recently in a case in Pennsylvania where we're connecting healthcare workers that have to work from home and allowing them to do their jobs in those locations. Next slide, please. That's not changing. Oh, there we go. So OnGo can also help with managing radio resources that are assigned to specific devices on that OnGo network. So here we show an example where you can segregate the network into logical groups. In a hospital, that would be doctors and nursing staff, for example, or by department, human resources, maintenance. And this logical grouping allows us to optimize the use of the OnGo network and guarantee a quality of service for specific users in that environment. So by assigning each of these groups, dedicated network and connectivity, you can prioritize the connectivity. And we give examples here like nurse call messaging, crash team calls, video, ensuring optimum performance and quality of service for those kind of use cases. So ultimately here you're giving the OnGo private network administrator, you're giving them the power to control which device attaches to which network. So give an example here of a maintenance worker device not being able to access the medical staff's network and ensuring data patient records in that case. Next slide, please. So you're probably wondering by now, if you haven't already gotten started with OnGo, how to get started. Next slide, please. So if we look at the right-hand side here first, let's just remind ourselves what goes into deploying an OnGo network in a healthcare environment. So if we start with the OnGo 4G LTE platform, this is like a carrier's network that can scale down and be easily controlled in the environment. And that connects to the small cells, which are like Wi-Fi access points, the OnGo small cells in these environments, just to the left of that. These two elements basically form the foundation of your OnGo network. Once those are in place, you can easily connect the enterprise PBX, for example. So now any mobile device on that network becomes a SIP extension. So now there's no need for pagers anymore, aging paging systems. You can easily, with a SIP desk phone, you can contact any OnGo device on that network, for example. And then in the next instance there, we're looking at alarm integration. So the latest nurse call technology can be integrated into the OnGo network. And the OnGo network ensures delivery of every single nurse call message and call in that environment. And then if we look to the left with the channel, distributor, global OEM, ultimately all these devices, the core network or EPC or evolved packet core as is often called, the small cells, all of these need to be brought together by channel partners, systems integrators, network providers, global OEMs. These guys are the glue, and you can see, you know, with the initial customer deployments in the US now, how these companies are starting to become more visible. They're very, very important in delivering services to the end user, examples like hospitals, elderly care, and remote health care. And once the OnGo network is deployed, these channel partners are really, really important to provide, you know, first, second line, and third line critical support. It's their network operation centers that will monitor the key performance indicators in these kind of environments, which are, you know, failure of any of the small cells, any dropped call, any nurse call message that doesn't get through. You know, all of those critical things affect patient outcomes and need to be monitored, etc. Next slide, please. And then finally, we're looking at deployment models. And I think the key takeaway here, it's about flexibility. You know, one size won't fit all. Cloud or hosted will be fine for maybe, you know, certain customers, multi-site customers that want to put the OnGo core in the cloud and maximize efficiencies in relation to that. Then smaller care providers may want the core co-located with the radios. Ultimately, the flexibility here to deploy on common off-the-shelf hardware, data centers to run on Amazon AWS or Microsoft Azure, OpenStack, VMware, LXC, etc. That flexibility is really, really important, as you know, one size is not going to fit all. Next slide. And back to you, team.
Well, very good. Thanks, Tighe, and thanks, Troy. So make you aware, please, if you do have questions, please put them into the window over, you'll see your questions window. Be happy to field those. One of the things I was curious about, and maybe invite all of us onto the webcam since there's only 3 of us. I'll get back on as well. So Tighe and Troy, you know, how do you guys see, you know, obviously COVID and the situation that transpired here it was completely unexpected. But you know, it's really changing the way we approach healthcare in particular. If you're looking into your crystal ball, let's say, you know, 18 months down the road, and how the future unfolds, and how connectivity and communication and something like OnGo can support that, how do you guys see things being different? I know, Troy, you've been in the healthcare industry for a long time, and you know, what do you see as the lasting changes? And I'll start with Troy, and then Tighe, ask you to jump in as well.
Well, I definitely think there's going to be fewer and fewer requirements for us to go into hospitals or in to see our primary care physicians. I mean, we're already seeing now, I mean, my company does teledoc and other things where we're doing those remotely. You know, so obviously on the user side, not much of an impact there. We're kind of used to it. But I think as the service side of it, or having to deliver it to multitudes of more people, they're probably not going to have the setup for it. Most hospitals don't just have a whole bunch of rooms sitting around with nothing to do with them. So being able to have, you know, mobile units to where they can send them around, I think that's where we see it, and that's really where the benefit of private LTE can come into place to just more rapidly deploy those solutions.
Interesting. Tighe?
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you look at some of the data provided to triage tents, you know, recently in the US using OnGo, it's an example of what Troy just described there. The you know, the ability to rapidly deploy data, you know, temporarily and quickly. And we're seeing with partners all over the world, really, you know, where we've been deployed for years. Where they're clearing rooms now in advance maybe of engineers coming into the space, but they're finding ways to work where they do have to go to site. But I chose the use cases today, I suppose, very much with your question in mind. I think the remote healthcare aspect, you know, is a key area of focus here. We've actually, if any part of OnGo has seen a bounce during all of this, I guess, you know, the area of fixed wireless access, rural broadband, We see our partners are very busy in that space as well as healthcare at the moment, because as I highlighted there in Pennsylvania, I think in rural Massachusetts as well, just trying to connect doctors and nursing staff when they're even at home, if they need to make contact back into work, etc. And then, of course, you know, US citizens being able to avail of doctors and access to doctors and nurses without having gone to hospitals, I think is very, very important, you know.
Troy, any other thoughts on that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, he brought up a good point. I mean, nurses probably start working at home more as well. I mean, obviously, you can't get away from the nurses being on site, but you know, being able to be remote and work off an environment that you know is going to be secure and you know is going to be reliable. I mean, my phone, I have, you know, our mobile service, and also have T-Mobile on my same phone. And where I live, I just don't have that great connectivity. So if you really want to make sure that they're going to get connected, private LTE is the way to go.
And Troy, I think you touched on this earlier. I'm watching the question panel to see what we have coming in. So I'm encouraging folks to ask questions. So please get your questions in here. But I will continue to have a conversation with my friends Tighe and Troy here as we go. But you know, I think Troy, you mentioned earlier that you know you have the ability to have different needs fulfilled by an OnGo network. It's not just specifically for the doctors or specifically for the nurses, but it could also be for the janitors. And I thought maybe you could explore that a little bit more. Is, you know, we've got 150 megahertz of spectrum here in an in-building kind of deployment. You've got lots of possibilities to set up different use-based networks. What other kinds of things can we do here?
Well, it's really unlimited. I mean, you could think of anything that you're doing today with a mobile wireless device, right? The difference is you're truly separating it out and having more of a business purpose solution that is going to be separated out from the public networks. You're going to avoid the ability for hackers to come in and take over it, and really give something that's just more secure and more reliable. And I think a big key of it is, as I mentioned in the beginning, you know, hospitals are, and it's kind of funny too, because I have my younger brother is an architect and he designs hospitals. And you know, one of the things that they do when they have an old building and they're adding on to it is they're doing it with hallways and just these other connection points. And of course, they put IT down in the basement, which I think is a silly place to put IT. But just the lack of connectivity throughout, and the ability to have a lot fewer access points from a private LTE perspective versus the Wi-Fi perspective, I think it's just going to be much easier to deploy and then give a whole lot better things, right? So you can do, I mean, I've seen voice, there's SpectraLink phones, and I'm not saying anything negative about those devices or Zebra, they're great devices, but they're over Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi just was not built for voice. So voice over IP just is not a good quality, reliable solution. And so that's really where our company is actually very excited about what private LTE presents.
Right. Tighe, anything to?
Yeah, I'd like to add an interesting device I've come across in recent weeks, around the COVID conversation, whereby it's like a Band-Aid, effectively a digital Band-Aid, but it's going under the arms of healthcare workers, and it's monitoring their temperature on a regular basis. It's really interesting to see how technology is innovating, and I think the idea with that device as well is for people at home, to monitor their temperature and, make sure they don't leave the home, let's say, if the temperature has been spiking, etc. So it's really interesting to see how things are evolving generally and very, very quickly, I suppose, around the situation we find ourselves in.
Interesting. Tighe,
and Alan, I was just gonna say, I would just add to that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily play into our business, but I mean, the evolution of artificial intelligence and robots that are roaming around the hospital, it's just pretty cool. I mean, they're going around and they're sanitizing, they're doing things remotely, and it's much easier to control those over a private LTE network than Wi-Fi.
Gotcha. So Tighe, one of the questions that's come in, and I've gotten a couple of different ways, is, how does this work internationally? Of course, CBRS is defined by the FCC for the US, but maybe just give us a little insight as to what may be happening spectrum sharing globally and private LTE globally.
Sure, my pleasure. So if I was showing you the Druid timeline here, I suppose we were founded in 2001 And we've been deploying private networks since then, you know, almost 20 years, which is really exciting. Back in those days, it was the aviation industry, you know, so we were delivering in-flight cellular services on planes, etc., with partners. And then around 2010, 2012 timeline, Band 3 spectrum became available in a couple of countries in Europe, the Netherlands, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, for example. So that gave us the opportunity with shared spectrum to do what OnGo is doing today. You know, we've got over 40,000 users, I think, in healthcare alone in some of those markets, for example. And then, you know, the typical verticals that you're seeing, you know, industry, etc., and healthcare, probably two of the top ones. And then in more recent years, France, Germany, spectrum has been made available there, which is really exciting. And we're seeing, I suppose, transport companies, shipping companies, industry, you know, manufacturing there, some of the first to market there. We've been delivering smart maintenance for some of the oil companies 4 years ago already with private LTE in those markets, because they just wanted to reduce costs, I guess, and enable remote working even back then. Parts of Australia as well. And then ultimately back to where we're focused on today. I mean, we're really excited about what's happening in the US. It's interesting how you highlight how far back it all goes. You know, for us, really, last year, we could see that difference last September when the FCC made that announcement. And yeah, we're really, really excited about the, you know, the scale of, you know, the American market could be the biggest market easily in the next couple of years, coming from nowhere. But it's, yeah, it's a very, very healthy, active market around the world. The UK have made some recent changes again based on what's happening in the US. So I think the stakeholders involved in OnGo, you know, all of that positive momentum is making a difference all throughout the world now in the private network space. And just to finish with, you know, IoT and 5G, I think plays straight into this, you know, from a macro carrier perspective, right back to the enterprise, you know.
Good point, Tighe. Thank you. That good insights. So here's a question that came in too, Troy. I think kind of maybe in your bailiwick. I'm curious how hospital administrators are responding to CBRS. Do they immediately see the value?
Well, they're starting to see the value. That I think an issue, and this ties in a little bit to the international play as well, but it's really the number of devices today that support band 48 here in the US. Internationally, band 42, that's in pretty much every phone that's over there. So in a sense, you could deploy private spectrum a lot quicker over there than you can here in the US. It's starting to evolve. We were pretty excited to see the iPhone 11 with the iPhone SE or whatever at $400. That's certainly going to be a big help. But it's, you know, most people, at least from our perspective, they're not necessarily looking at private LTE as a way to implement better voice solutions. I think they really are looking at it more on the IoT side of things, keeping track of carts and things that are roaming around the hospital. Again, they're doing it today with Wi-Fi. We think it's going to be a better solution on the IoT side of things with private LTE. And then, oh, by the way, once they've made that investment, then they can just add the voice pieces on top of it.
Sure. Yep. Interesting. So Tighe, another question's come in that I'm going to read it verbatim, and then we can maybe ask for some clarification. Can you please speak to the business models in terms of investments and partnerships that will drive OnGo private network deployments by enterprises like healthcare? Can you talk about the role of managed service providers outside of the typical MNOs in managing these networks?
Yeah, so I suppose I can't get into specifics on a call like this because, you know, that would be quite sensitive. We would have detailed information, I suppose, in short, and engagement models at every level. And we're just a part of the ecosystem. So just to remind the audience, we're the OnGo LTE core network in the diagram that I showed there. So we're just a part of that ecosystem. You've got your handsets, your small cells, IoT devices. There's many other parts of that ecosystem. But I think that channel model is very important. And you know, we were speaking to Gartner recently, and they complimented us on that model that we have there, going back to 2001. I suppose we've been at this for 20 years, and you can't do it all by yourself. And absolutely, managed service, it really depends. For us, it depends on the partner. We've some very large systems integrators, network provider partners in the world, and global OEMs. And sometimes those partners are vertical specific. The bigger ones address different verticals. And yeah, I've seen in healthcare, back to the subject matter today, in healthcare, a managed service, a hosted service has been very popular in the Dutch market, for example, where one specific provider would host the core and then deploy the small cells at the edge of the network, resilient, redundant architecture. They're the elderly care example in the use case, and they have hundreds of sites deployed in that way, and they deliver that service as an OpEx model, as a managed service model. So I think if I went back to my deployment model slide in my mind, I think you need to be flexible. One size isn't going to fit all, and depending on the end customer's requirements. Some of them, even I was just chatting to a customer today on a commercial call, and at certain parts of the year they were saying they'd be up for OpEx, and in other parts of the year they wanted to do a capital spend. So that's one single customer looking for that flexibility. So I think it's all about flexibility, really. I hope I've done my best to answer that question. But yeah, I mean, we would have detailed engagement models, certainly from our product perspective, at different tiers that I could go into with whoever that was asked the question.
Good deal. Troy, you want to?
Yeah, agreed. No, I mean, I think Tighe hit it. I mean, there really isn't a one size fits all. I mean, just for what needs to be done on the hospital side or any industry vertical side. So I think it's going to take a village almost to try to deploy some of these things, right? There's a number of partners within the Alliance community that we are aligning ourselves with that are going to take a big piece of it, but they may be familiar doing DAS infrastructure or networking infrastructure and access points and things like that, but they may not have the connectivity with phones systems or PBX connectivities, which is something that we can integrate with. So it really is just aligning the partnerships and then having the conversation. I was on a call last week with one of our existing partners and then trying to get them excited about the private LTE. And I think he was even struggling with it a little bit until he started to understand the use cases. So I think if you break it down and step small and not try to boil the ocean and say, here's the one problem that we're trying to solve, then I think there are a number of ways to get in and do those pretty quickly and easily.
Yeah, it's interesting that you put it that way. I've been privy to some conversations with rural healthcare providers, and and it was very interesting to me how focused they were on the use, use cases. And they were saying, here's my problem, here's my problem, here's my problem, this is what I need to solve. And it was from telemedicine, but it was also inside the walls of their building. So that was quite intriguing. And from that, you mentioned earlier that your son is an architect that helps design hospitals, among other things. But is there a difference between new build, somebody's building a completely new facility versus an existing facility? What they need to consider in that layout? Or maybe you could speak to that a little bit, and Tighe as well.
Yeah, I think I think it's both, right? I mean, if it were me building a new hospital, one of the great opportunities with private LTE is the avoidance of all the fiber that they have to run, right? I mean, we have, even on the CBRS Alliance website, there's the mall, the Dream Mall or whatever it is in New Jersey. So there's a number of examples out there to where implementing this just with a couple of access points saved literally millions of dollars and obviously saved a ton of time. But that's Greenfield. Those are easy to do, right? I mean, many hospitals are old. They've been out there a long time. So they have access points that are already in place. But there are a number of providers of those access points that simply offer a plug-in module. So they can actually plug in directly into those Wi-Fi access points, start adding in the private LTE side of things. So it's really going to be a mix. I mean, Greenfield's always easier and more exciting and probably offers a bigger savings. Whereas the other ones, it gets you kind of the best of both worlds.
Gotcha. Tighe?
Yeah, I would agree with Troy's points there. And yeah, I remember when on our involvement in American Dream, these newer buildings are built for energy efficiency as well, which is, on the flip side of that, it's blocking signal getting in. So OnGo and having a small cell deployment in building is really, really important in those environments. And then I remember some of the, the really older buildings in the UK and elsewhere where some of the walls could be several feet thick. You're talking about 150-year-old hotel building, for example. So again, yeah, I think it probably comes back to flexibility, rich portfolio of small cells. We work with every partner really, but the stronger ones are those that have outdoor and indoor. high powered and low powered. So, you know, you have that flexibility really to get around any problem, whether it's a new building or an old building, you know.
Fantastic. So ask you guys for any last thoughts. Troy, anything you'd like to emphasize as we're wrapping up here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think that there is a process to it, right? So it's okay. Now you've been made aware of it. Go investigate. There's a ton of stuff on the CBRS website. Obviously, we've done the team has really done a very good job, I think, of the varying companies that are part of it to put other use cases out there and examples and ways that it works. But it just kind of starts with some phone calls and some dialogue, identifying what is it that, you know, what is the true problem statement. We think we know. I identified several that I thought were important in my tenure and working in and around hospitals, but you know, bring them to us. We can certainly point you and direct you to the right people that can help facilitate some of the needs that are there. And then just, you know, kind of be patient. This isn't necessarily hey, this sounds great, I want to order it tomorrow, right? It's a little bit of a process and integration, getting all the technologies kind of combined together, but we're getting really, really close.
Good deal. Thanks, Rick. Tighe?
Yeah, I would just add, I hope we've shown how simple it can be. You know, Troy is dead right. It can take a village, but you know, it's about focus. You know, look at the temporary COVID-19 OnGo type data deployments that have been put together so quickly and so easily recently. You know, it just shows how quickly and easily it can be done. And you know, I hope we've made it clearer and shown people the way forward. You know, and it's all about innovation now. You know, I think this is a great time right now to innovate, and I think that's another bounce or another busy area in these times of sheltering in place. We see an awful lot of innovation. People aren't running around like headless chickens and jumping on planes and trying to get places. You know, we've got time to think now and strategize and plan and get ready. And certainly, yeah, I mean, rural broadband and healthcare are still very, very busy areas in these current times, and OnGo is ideal for those. So looking forward to hearing from folks and helping them out.
Very good. Well, I wish to thank both of my presenters today, Tighe, Troy. As always, it's a pleasure. Anytime I get a chance to chat with you guys, it's always a lot of fun. Always learn something. I hope for our attendees today, you enjoyed it as well. We're very fortunate in the Alliance to have, you know, these two gentlemen are just representative of the kind of expertise and the kind of knowledge that really is through our entire membership. So we're very fortunate in that. I said we have an embarrassment of riches in spectrum. We also have an embarrassment of riches in knowledge and talent. So with that, I say thank you again. Thank you to all the folks that attended today. The presentations, or the presentation, a recording of this session will be available on the public website in the coming days. We very much appreciate your questions. If we didn't get to some of your questions, we will try to make sure we cover those and put that information up with the recording and the slides. With that, I say thank you. Good evening, Tighe. Good afternoon, Troy. Good morning to our friends on the West Coast. Thank you all, and have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.